So I'm working on a new illustration to talk about the science versus the art of discipleship. And very quickly to understand the difference between the two, the science would be the very mechanical beginnings of discipleship, and the art would be the adaptive, intuitive part of discipleship. So one of the reasons why I wanted to come up with an illustration to explain the differences between the two is because a lot of times disciple makers kind of get trapped into one or the other and don't know when to appropriately apply each in the growth or transformation of the disciples of Jesus that they're discipling and coaching and advising, mentoring. So at first, I drew this diagram as a bell curve, but one of the obvious problems is, we always want to go up. We don't want to go down. So I thought, no, that's an inadequate way to illustrate this. So I've come up with another way. And, obviously in transformation, we want to be continuously growing. So we may start out in our discipleship this way, but then we want to see growth as we continue to be transformed into the image of Jesus, the Father's Son. And so this is the part where we're beginning. And the hardest part of anything is the beginning, trying to gain confidence, competence, and commitment in any particular discipline. So let's illustrate sharing the gospel. In the beginning, sharing the gospel, there's all kinds of factors that play into this being hard. Fear, lack of knowledge, lack of competence, understanding, information. And so as disciple makers, we're coaching and teaching and mentoring young disciples in the process of growing in their ability to share the gospel. But after a while, they begin to make headway and they begin to practice and they grow in their confidence, competence, and commitment. And eventually, it becomes a lifestyle. And this is a huge debarkation from the novice to the one that is proficient. And, the 3 C's are very evident in their life. And so that's what we're trying to get them to. And now we start on the art of discipleship and how that may look, taking the same illustration of the gospel, is they begin to figure out that sharing the gospel the same way with everyone may not be the most effective way to share the gospel. So they begin to experiment with different ways or adapt the ways that they've been taught. And they find different degrees of success in a good way. And they also find different degrees of appropriateness with their gifting and personality. So there's a lot of adaptation going on, including some adaptation that may not be what they need to be doing. as far as sharing the gospel, the technique, but they learn through trial and error. So they may try some things that don't fit or don't work, but they're constantly adapting, and it becomes more about the other person that they're discipling rather than about their proficiency. So that's a big distinction. It's kind of like driving a car. When you teach somebody to drive a car, they're very mechanical, very rigid, doing everything. And it's just kind of a herky-jerky process. But after a while, they get the hang of it, and it's almost like second nature. You know, you don't have to say, hey, remember to turn on your blinker. Let the steering wheel turn itself back on course. You know, you don't have to pull it back around. It'll right itself on its own. And so there's kind of the difference between the two. So let's look at Jesus's example of discipleship and kind of see this in Jesus's ministry. When the disciples, 12 and the 70, were sent out, Jesus was very directive, and he gave very specific instructions and very simple instructions. Tell them the kingdom of God has come near to you. Heal the sick, cast out demons, don't take anything with you. Very simple, very directive communication. But, and I need to find the verse for that. Let me write that down. Get the verses. I know Luke 10 and Matthew 10, I think it is. That's the 12 and the 70. But the thing about this part of it is it tends to be very simple, very directive. On the other hand, there's a place where Jesus says, hey, remember I told you, don't take anything with you. Well, I'm telling you now, take even a sword. You know, I don't know what that means, but that's a huge departure from this side, the science, and now this side, the art. We see this also with Jesus as he's modeling. You know, it says, and he went to every town and village proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. Now, we know that that's kind of a capsule of what Jesus was teaching. But then you go to the woman at the well, and we see Jesus. She's sitting by a well, and Jesus uses this opportunity to preach the gospel to her using the illustration of water, just like he used the illustration of for fishers, you know, they become fishers of men. So Jesus was the master of that, adapting to the context, adapting the message without compromising the principles or the truth of the message. He would adapt the message to the situation or the person. Now, that is like, you know, evangelism 401. You know, that's not 101. That's when we start seeing the art of discipleship. Now, two mistakes that we see in this. Mistake number one is we start on this side. And we just kind of model the intuitive part of this, and we expect disciples to get it. That does not usually lead to competence, confidence, and commitment. Usually it leads to frustration and quitting, and I could never be like you, you know? So instead of doing that, making that mistake, let's start over here on this side. Now, mistake number 2 is that we never get to this side. We're so mechanical, so rigid, so tied to our tools and our methods that we don't free people up to grow in order to adapt to their context or their personality or people. That's just as big a mistake as starting over here on this side. So one of the things that we need to think through is how do we start? How do we recognize the transition period or point, the season that you know we need to move from science to art? And then how do we help people through the art without losing the principles? And that's really important. So coming up with this illustration, you guys can help me flesh it out.